Welcome to class, everyone. I'm your enthusiastic professor for today's explainer, and I want you to go ahead and close your eyes for just a second. I want you to travel back with me to the year 1930. The world was a vastly different place back then. Aviation is in its absolute infancy, television is barely a laboratory experiment, and the very idea of a truly global sporting event uniting the entire planet, well, that seemed like a madcap, almost impossible dream. But down in the small South American nation of Uruguay, that impossible dream was about to kick off, and in the process, lay the very foundation for modern global sports diplomacy. Go ahead and take out your notebooks. As you can see on today's syllabus, we're going to track the global diplomacy gamble, embark on a transatlantic ocean odyssey, witness the building of the Centenario Cathedral, cover some historic firsts, analyze the infamous two-ball final, and wrap up the whole thing with a final exam historic review.
Section 1. The Global Diplomacy Gamble. Okay, let's dive right into this first section and figure out exactly how this completely unprecedented tournament was conceived in the first place. You might be wondering, why Uruguay, right? Why not some massive European powerhouse? Well, in the 1920s, Uruguay were the undisputed football kings of the world. They had waltzed away with back-to-back Olympic gold medals in 1924 and 1928 with this incredibly mesmerizing style of play. But as the late 20s hit, the Great Depression was looming heavily over the entire globe. And despite this intense economic anxiety, Uruguay made a seriously bold choice. To celebrate their centennial of independence in 1930, they offered to host the first independent world championship. And get this, they promised to pay all the travel and accommodation costs for the participating teams. It was a massive, unprecedented diplomatic and financial gamble.
But here's the thing, a generous host doesn't mean much if nobody actually shows up. And this is where the tournament nearly completely fell apart. Basically, no European team wanted to make that grueling trip. Their domestic seasons were at risk, their players were just amateurs with actual day jobs, and honestly, they threatened a full-on boycott. Enter FIFA President Jules Rimet. His vision was to create a standalone championship to unite nations totally independent of the Olympics. So, to save his dream, Rimet initiated this incredible diplomatic hustle. He lobbied governments, he made deals, and he pulled strings like a man possessed, all to ensure this global experiment wouldn't just die before it even began.
Section 2. A Transatlantic Ocean Odyssey.
So let's see how Rimet's hustle actually paid off. I want you to imagine stepping aboard the massive steamship, the SS Conte Verde, over in Italy, looking at this event through the eyes of a traveler embarking on a genuinely historic voyage. Looking at the passenger manifest, it's like something straight out of a movie. You'd be rubbing shoulders with Jules Rimet himself, personally clutching the newly minted championship trophy right there in his travel bag. You'd see players like Frenchman Lucien Laurent trying to stay fit and active on the literal deck of the ship. You've got the French, Belgian, and Yugoslavian squads, those brave European pioneers who answered the call. Oh, and you even have the Romanian team, who were essentially just a group of oil company employees. King Carol II of Romania acted as the ultimate HR manager here. He personally selected the squad and demanded their bosses give them 3 months of paid leave just to represent their country. Along the way, they even made a pit stop in Rio to pick up the Brazilian contingent.
The really crucial point to understand here is the sheer physical toll of this journey. Today, we're so used to modern athletes flying on luxury private charter flights, recovering in hyperbaric chambers, right? But back in 1930, these players, officials, and all their match equipment were literally stuck at sea for 2 grueling weeks. They were crossing the vast Atlantic Ocean to Montevideo, united by a shared historic purpose, sure, but mostly united by a whole lot of seasickness and intense nausea.
Section 3. Building the Centenario Cathedral.
So after those 2 nauseating weeks, our travelers finally arrived in Montevideo, dropping us right into the frantic effort to build an absolute cathedral of sport. When the players showed up, the supposed centerpiece of Uruguay's bid, the monumental Estadio Centenario designed by architect Juan Scasso, wasn't even finished. The number you're looking at, 5, represents the number of days before the final match that this colossal concrete bowl was actually completed. 5 days. It was a frantic, round-the-clock construction project meant to symbolize Uruguayan national pride and their massive footballing ambition.
Nature, however, was absolutely not cooperating. Heavy rains severely delayed the concrete pours for the Centenario. Because of this, the early tournament matches actually had to be pushed out to much smaller existing venues around the city, like Gran Park Central and Estadio Pocitos. Honestly, these logistical nightmares and crazy weather delays only highlight the sheer willpower, determination, and grit required from the host nation to pull off this massive diplomatic gamble.
Section 4. historic firsts and records.
Which brings us perfectly to the actual matches themselves. Now, what's really interesting about this is the sheer understatement of it all. This is a quote from Frenchman Lucien Laurent, reflecting on scoring the very first goal in the history of the tournament against Mexico. Think about how players celebrate today, right? Backflips, sliding on their knees, ripping off their shirts. Laurent hits a beautiful 19th-minute half volley to make literal global history, and his reward? A polite pat on the back. Like he said, no one rolled around in the ground in ecstasy. It was just a completely different, much more modest era.
Since there were only 13 teams making the trip and absolutely no qualifiers, the group stages were a pure, unpredictable knockout. Let's walk through some of those incredible milestones. You see Laurent's first goal there at the top. Next up is the first hat trick, scored by American Bert Patanoid. The USA team, which was largely made up of semi-pros, were labeled shot putters and bruisers by the purists, but they stunned everyone by dismantling their opponents. Though crazy enough, FIFA didn't officially recognize Patanoid's record until 2006. And finally, we've got Argentina's Guillermo Stiboli, who became the top scorer with 8 goals, perfectly exemplifying Argentina's incredibly slick, aggressive style of play that yielded 10 goals in just their first 2 games.
But listen, I want to make sure we don't look at these records through rose-colored glasses. The gritty reality of 1930 was intense. There were absolutely zero luxury conditions. These were amateurs and semi-pros literally risking their livelihoods back home just to be there. To give you an idea of the visceral sacrifice, look at French goalkeeper Alex Thépot. He played almost an entire match with a severe jaw injury after a brutal collision. It was the physical, visceral grit of these early pioneers that truly laid the groundwork for the polished, billion-dollar spectacle we all enjoy today.
Section 5. The 2-ball final.
That gritty, incredibly unpredictable tournament eventually brought our traveler's journey to its climax on July 30th. Setting up the ultimate showdown between fierce neighbors, Uruguay and Argentina. The atmosphere in Montevideo that day was just absolute electricity mixed with shared anxiety. An estimated 93,000 fans jammed inside the newly finished Centenario Stadium. The demand to see this final was so astronomically high that thousands of Argentinian fans actually caused a stampede trying to cross the River Plate by boat just to get a glimpse of the action. And this setup brilliantly illustrates just how deep the intense nationalism of the era ran. We ended up having the most bizarre pre-match diplomatic dispute in sports history. Both teams stubbornly demanded they use their own domestically manufactured ball. I mean, can you imagine? So the referees compromise? They used the Argentine ball for the first half, and Argentina flowed beautifully, taking it 2-1 lead. But for the second half, they switched to the larger, heavier Uruguayan ball, and the momentum entirely shifted back to the hosts. Riding that momentum with their own ball, Uruguay completed a dramatic, unforgettable comeback. With iconic goals from Santos Iriarte and Héctor Castro, who, by the way, amazingly played with only one leg after a carpentry accident, Uruguay secured a historic 4-2 victory. They became the first-ever champions. The result sparked unhinged jubilation in the streets of Montevideo, while over in Buenos Aires, shocked silence quickly turned into outright riots. Football's first great international feud was officially cemented into history.
Section 6. Final Exam Historic Review. Wow. What a journey. All right, class, it is time for our final exam review. Let's summarize exactly how this chaotic, beautiful event transformed into a global obsession. Let's rapid-fire review these milestones. The host and inaugural winner? Uruguay. The total teams brave enough to make the trip? Just 13. The key diplomat who willed the entire thing into existence? Jules Rimet. And the primary legacy? The undeniable birth of global sports diplomacy. Look, this tournament was far from perfect. It was chaotic, it absolutely had Eurocentric biases, and it was pretty rough around the edges. But in that imperfection lay the real magic that proved to the world that vastly different nations could absolutely be united by a shared passion.
And you know, that legacy isn't just trapped in the history books of 1930. It lives on today, quite literally worn right there on the chest of modern players. Uruguay's triumph cemented their place in history, which is proudly symbolized today by the 4 stars you see above their national team crest. Those honor their 2 World Cup victories and those 2 foundational Olympic titles recognized by FIFA. Which leaves us with this final thought. Every giant leap in human connection, every massive cultural milestone, starts with a brave, slightly crazy, and almost madcap first step. Uruguay took that gamble in 1930, and it literally changed the world. So I leave you with this question to chew on. Look around at the world today.
What crazy, seemingly impossible gamble happening right now is going to spark tomorrow's great global obsession? Keep your eyes open, class. I'll see you in the next explainer.